Alright, this current project on the 66 GM 4107 is actually knocking on differential better than I expected. I had two big leaks. One, if you can see that, my lens is really dirty. Oof, hold on a second. That's better. One was where the differential gear set meets the pumpkin, the axle housing, and the other one, let's see if I can get a shot of it. Oh. Not a lot of room in here. Right there you can see that little sliver of green. That's a new seal behind the pinion flange or pinion yoke. That one was just pouring gear oil, and thankfully this differential, this Rockwell axle in this old bus, has shims for setting the pinion positioning rather than like a crush sleeve like some of them stupid Fords like my F-250. So I was able just to take this nut off here, which came off really surprisingly easy. I'm a little worried how easy that was. And the yoke just slid right off the spline shaft by hand. I didn't have to use a puller. I was figuring I'd have to build something for this tight space and put the new seal in. It was a little tricky to get it lined up and square because it's huge and I don't have a seal installer that size. But I got it all in there. I've got it not quite pushed back as far in that housing as the one I took out. There was a little bit of a wear mark on the yoke and plenty of clean space just in front of it. So I'm hoping that that will cut down on any sort of leakage. So I've got that leak, I hope, tidied up. The nice thing was I was able to pull this drive shaft flange without splitting my U-joints, which feel tight. So I don't need to replace them or anything. It's a little bitty baby shaft. I don't know if I can show you. I mean, it's huge in diameter, but it just goes from that flange at the back of the Allison V730 up to this flange for the Rockwell axle. This is a weird arrangement where the axle has like a 63 degree angle and the transmission sits at a 63 degree angle, and the engine, which you can't see from here, is perpendicular to the vehicle. It sits, transverse mount in the back. But unique to the GM setups. I'm not sure if this is the original axle. Looks a little different than the one in my parts manual, but this coach has a driveline engine transmission out of a slightly newer GM Transit bus, and so I believe that they may have switched this whole rear axle. They're almost identical, same like basic design, just slight difference in where the seal sits and how it's in there. Thankfully the same seal fit because I ordered it for my axle, so it may very well be the same. Just some variants in how Rockwell built them. I was pleased when I pulled the drain plug to drain this monster of a housing that, other than the fine mud of any driveline or axle with this kind of mileage, there were no chunks of any kind in the oil or on the magnet, which I've seen some horror stories recently where people just went to change the fluid and there were like whole teeth hanging out on the magnet. Getting this guy separated wasn't as bad as I was expecting, but it was harder than it should have been. You can see here these are holes threaded for separating bolts, and in the manual there's a bolt with a nut on it always in here, and the lock nut you loosen and then you crank this down to start separating it, and there's one about 180 degrees out on this other side. However, mine didn't have the bolts in it, and so this one I got cleaned out enough that I could get a bolt in it. The other one would not. No matter what I did, I could not get it to thread. It's just too crusty. I don't know if you can see it up in there. So I used a combination of tightening this one a little and then walking around the outside with a variety of cold chisels, just gently putting some pressure in between at the seam here. And yeah, got it to move out. This thing weighs like 350 or 400 pounds, and I'm not taking it all the way out. I am going to just reseal it. There doesn't appear to be a gasket. It looks like someone used some sort of sealer, but not very much. And yeah, it's supposed to have a gasket. The original design was with a gasket. However, there is nobody making that gasket anymore. And instead of trying to cut one out of gasket paper, given that I don't want to take this off all the way off these studs, my hope is that if I clean this real well, scrape it gently, wipe it all down, degrease it, get some brake parts cleaner in there maybe, get it nice and dry and clean, and then use some ultra gray RTV, and I can put a ton of it all the way around. I'll start at the top and work my way down probably, get it smoothed out and gently squish it so it's touching both sides all the way around. I can use these to pull it back in just enough to squish, and then I'll let it sit, 10 or 15 minutes or so to start to skin, and gently tighten it some more and kind of ensure that everything is sealed. And then I'm going to probably leave it dry, not put oil back in it, overnight, and get my drive shaft hooked back up, get my axles put back in. I had to pull them, so axle shafts, so I could move this out, get everything back together except oil in this thing, and I'll come back tomorrow and stick some oil in it. So I'm gonna work on that. I'll show you outside the axle shafts in just a moment. Oh, that'll get cut out. So these guys are thankfully a full floating axle, which, 35-foot diesel pusher, of course it would be. One would hope. And so it's possible to remove the axle shaft on both sides without disassembling the wheels or the bearings in any way. I am running grease, not oil, in my bearings because that's how it was when I bought it, even though factory they ran oil. So there's this special seal that keeps the axle oil from getting in and washing out and leaking past your oil seal. So I've got that in place still to try to keep the little residue from running back there. It's an offset differential, so this axle shaft is shorter than the one on the driver's side. It's quite a bit longer. You can see it there. And it's the same sort of setup. So I've got a lot of cleaning to do, and I will pop back on here once I get all that put back together. Alright, not much left to say. I got this all RTV'd and torqued back in gently. I will come back tomorrow and fully torque all of these. It is tight, but not ugga-dugga tight. So I'm hopeful. We've got no leaks there once it's set, and you can see nice new hardware. All of the ones that came off were really rusty and didn't like to thread back together, so I got all new grade 8 hardware there. There's 8 of them suckers are 7/16, which is apparently much less common these days. Tractor Supply had none. I got them from Lowe's. So I've got my axle shafts back in outside. I'll show you that. And then it's just clean up my tools. And tomorrow, fill it with gear oil. Little sprinkle coming down. The axle shafts are in. Same on the other side. I just got this mess to clean up with, you know, bus life. And then back on the road.